afternoon, everybody. Welcome to #GotMoney. I'm Elizabeth Jackson. Welcome to GotMoney. Nicki Hutley, welcome.
Well, thank you for that great fanfare. That's
Thank
overwhelming.
you. I feel like I should have had some trumpets playing for you. We were talking at the beginning of the show before we went to air about the cost of Victoria, and I was really upset, as I think you were too, about Josh Frydenberg's statement that Victoria had single-handedly destroyed the economy of Australia. And I know I'm paraphrasing. It felt like a really deep cut to make it and I live in Victoria, so obviously I took it personal, as I know other Victorians did. That was a bit of a flippant remark, wasn't it?
Well, you know, we're in really difficult times. People's confidence is really frayed, and it's just not helpful to say things like that. You know, Victoria's in a very difficult situation. Whatever you think about how, you know, quarantine might have been managed or anything else, the thing is this virus gets away from us. You know, we've seen that in New Zealand, even when they thought they had eradicated it. It's a really slippery little devil, and this can happen in any state. You know, it can happen anywhere. It is what it is, and, you know, sort of gratuitous criticisms aren't the solution here. It's what we need is to give people confidence that we're managing better, that we've got the supports in place for economically, socially, mental health and well-being, that we've got all those supports in place, and that we will get out of this. You know, we've just had great news today about regional Victoria, you know, now coming out. Melbourne is not that far away, and I know how dreadful it is and how deep the impacts are being felt. We need to focus on the positives, not to undermine that there is plenty of negative there, but let's focus on where's the hope, what can we reach for, not play the blame game. But I understand the frustration of so many people. You know, if you remember back in the first wave, when Scott Morrison was talking about, well, we'll all be out of this by July. And now it's kind of, we'll be on that proverbial bus, whatever that means, by December. But even then, that's probably a bit optimistic. You know, we are all in this together. What happens in one state affects everybody else. Everyone's doing the best they can. You know, it does not help anyone to make those sorts of comments. But I suspect the man is very tired and wasn't necessarily thinking that clearly.
Yeah, I would. And this is the other side of it too. Of course, these politicians are human beings. You know, I look at Daniel Andrews every day on that TV and think, mate, how are you're powerhousing through this? Just powerhousing. And I know he's had his critics, but when we see the numbers where the numbers are, that's extraordinary. Now, I was reading in an article, ABC quoted the Prime Minister in August saying, estimates from the Treasury suggested those measures, so closing our borders, would shrink our gross domestic product by $7 billion to $9 billion in the quarter ending to September. Is that accurate? Has our gross domestic product shrunk by that much as a result of Victoria being closed?
It probably will have. It'll be a while before we get the figures for the September quarter, but that's a reasonably accurate estimate. You know, stage 4 restrictions, as you would well be aware, are incredibly severe. You know, far more than anything we saw in the first lockdown. So it has stopped the economy, or you know, acted as a severe drag on the economy in so many ways. If you think about even the places that have stayed open, you know, so think about just meatworks, for example, or manufacturers that have had to cut their workforce and lower their production levels. So of course it's, you know, it's not just cafes that have closed, it's right across all sectors. So a much bigger shock. Fortunately, only in one state, but for that state, Victoria, you know, it's a massive hit to the economy. But this is what's going to happen, you know, and we can't say that there won't be third waves in Victoria or second waves elsewhere. Everybody who's sitting around being very smug about, oh, well, Victoria, this or that, you know, just pride comes before a fall. And to any of us, we are on a roller coaster ride. That, you know, everything that happens economically is fallout from a health crisis that is, you know, just outside the scope of anything that we've ever experienced, or at least in 100 years. Hopefully we get a vaccine. We've already got treatments that are lowering the death rate, which is really good for those that get it. Not preventing deaths, obviously, but lowering it. If we can get a vaccine, it's not an overnight solution. It's not a silver bullet, but it will really help. But, you know, until we get those things, we're in a difficult place. And even in places like New South Wales, we still have restrictions about how we can gather and what we can do. And we're all getting used to every time we do go out. I know for a Victorian, this probably sounds like I'm bragging a bit, but you know, you have to scan in, and we're just used to doing that now. And it's the price, that is the price of freedom, and I will happily pay it. So it's better than being stuck under lockdown, but nothing is normal for anybody.
Can we take that as a country, a $7 billion to $9 billion dollar shrinkage in the gross domestic product? Last time I spoke to you, you were pretty confident about our ability to recover. Are you still feeling that way?
I am, but obviously the deeper the hole we dig ourselves into, or we fall into, the longer it takes for us to climb out. The higher unemployment goes, the longer it takes to recover and get back to pre-COVID levels, assuming that it does. You know, we have unemployment still at around 6% in 2024. It was around 5% before COVID, and struggling then. And of course, there's all sorts of technological change. We know from our own surveys that lots of firms, the firms that are surviving, are looking at ways to cut costs to help them survive. They're looking at investing in technology, and some of this will mean that jobs won't come back, or jobs will be replaced. And we need to look to new areas for the jobs of, what are the, you know, the jobs of the future, the buzz phrase at the moment. You know, where do, you know, if some of your listeners have lost their job or are likely to, what are the things that they can engage in terms of training to think about, well, what's the next big thing? Where could I take, you know, my skill set and evolve it so that I've got something to come back to when we do come to the other side? But we will. If you think about it, our economy in any one quarter is worth around 500 billion. So, you know, 7 to 9 is not insignificant, but it's not, you know, there's a lot more that's happening out there. So it's not good. It's certainly damaging, but it's, yeah, we will survive it, and we will come back.
Have some states inside of COVID done better than others?
Oh, absolutely. And that's mainly a factor of the better you handle the virus, the better you, quicker you get people out of restrictions, and the more your economy goes. But it's not just about the virus itself. That's a factor for everybody to different degrees. Obviously, you know, Victoria is the worst extreme, and probably the best example is WA, having shut down their borders to everybody. You know, if you look at their economy, where they're going with in terms of people eating out, retail trade, just general activity, they're also protected, of course, a little bit more because of mining exports. You know, they're doing, I was talking to colleagues the other day, you know, and they're sitting in the office just side by side on a video call, and you think, wow, like, you think you guys have got it, and you guys do have it tough in Victoria. But even for somebody in New South Wales looking at people in WA, we're kind of like, oh, wow, that is so normal, because so many of us are not back at our desks. We're having to work from home. And I know that that's particularly for young people, where your work and your social life tend to be much more blended. I know that's a real struggle for people. But yeah, look, when you get the virus under control, that's when lots of parts of the economy can open up. It's not normal, though. You know, there are still restrictions as to how many people can sit in a restaurant, how many people can sit in a movie theatre, and not many people are that happy. They're just starting to pick up in China now, and they're 6 months ahead of us. So they're just, the box office takings are only just, and they're still well below normal levels. So, you know, we haven't got migration and coming in, and that feeds lots of, particularly service, you know, people servicing industries, construction, retail, those sorts of things. So there's still lots of things that are holding the economy back. But hopefully, as we get the virus under control, when we see what we can do if more people open up, you know, if you were to walk around Sydney, you would think, not the CBD, which still looks like a bit of a desert wasteland, but in the suburbs, things kind of look a lot more normal. Yes, there are shops that are gone, but there's still a lot more normal activity, and Victoria will be there too. It's obviously not soon enough for people who are in lockdown, but it will come.
Apparently, I was talking to one of my colleagues at Joy the other day, and he said it's just a ghost town. He said you wouldn't recognise it, and he said the thing that saddens him the most are the fiddly signs on the restaurants and the bars that didn't make it through. Okay, so WA's done well. Queensland, have they continued to grow in spite of COVID?
So every single state economy contracted in the June quarter,
Okay.
but some are recovering in the September quarter, but we've only got the partial data. But if we have a look at, mobility data, where people are going, restaurant bookings, the credit card sales data, we're seeing that there's some reasonably good growth in those states that have got fewer restrictions: Northern Territory, South Australia, West Australia. Tassie's still not 100%, and the ACT is really puzzling, where they haven't had a case in a couple of months, but I don't know whether it comes from the politicians, or because there are in fact fewer politicians coming to Canberra. A lot of them are staying in their home states. Maybe that's it. Haven't quite figured out what's going on in Canberra, but the numbers in the ACT don't look quite as good. But Queensland, look at them. And Queenslanders are all going on holidays across the state. So they're, instead of going to New South Wales, they're just investing by going to Cairns. Look, you're seeing this in New South Wales as well. If you try and book a place anywhere up the Central Coast, in the Hunter Valley, places that people are just desperate to get. And I'm sure Victoria will see the same thing when Melburnians come out again. You'll be just going, I've got to go to Daylesford for a weekend, or wherever it is, Ballarat. Then you'll just be going.
We will go nuts. Seriously, there are people here that want to get out, and I know I'm one of them. Okay, so some states are doing better. Is it time, once we are out of lockdown, is it not time to open the borders? Will that not elevate some of the pressure that we're under economically once we start trading among these other states?
Yeah, no, absolutely. If we can get people moving around between the states, we get more, traffic, not just people travelling, but goods travelling across borders. We go back to a more normal life as much as we can, even though our international borders are closed. It will help everybody's economies to normalise. I understand politically why WA might not have wanted to open its borders before, but Queensland and WA not letting people from New South Wales in at the moment, when our numbers are really, there are no mystery cases effectively. It's just ridiculous. And we're seeing much more argument and argy-bargy on this. And obviously the New South Wales Premier and Queensland Premier are getting quite vocal with each other on this issue. But quite rightly, the epidemiologists that I've listened to are saying there is no reason for not to allow people from the ACT and New South Wales to be travelling. And particularly when you see like that dreadful story about that poor girl in the ACT who wasn't allowed to go to her father's funeral. I mean, for goodness sake, it's just ridiculous. To make all of New South Wales and the ACT a hotspot is just totally ludicrous. And it's not just the economy, it's affecting family lives in all sorts of ways. So I would be urging states, with the exception, obviously, Victoria's in a different position, but we should be opening up borders across the rest of the country at the moment.
The other side of it too is, I haven't actually read this, but I've heard that there are some fairly serious mental health issues out there, particularly in Victoria right now. I've got friends that work in various different sectors, and while there's the fundamental currency cost to an economy, the other side of that is there are actually people locked down and unable to move and unable to connect. So we need to find I think we need to find a balance in all of this. JobKeepers, JobKeepers is going to... Sorry?
One of the things that I say is that on that mental health issue is that governments are spending a lot more money of support. And so I know, for example, Black Dog Institute has just got, massive increase in the numbers of calls. But touch wood, what we're not seeing isn't any significant increase in the rate of suicides, and that which everyone was extremely worried about. And that's not to underplay the great anxiety and mental anguish that a lot of people are under, not just in Victoria, but across the places as businesses are coming under enormous pressure. People are losing their jobs. But it is good that we are, it's front and centre for both state and federal governments to keep increasing the support in that area. But you're right. It is a very, we have to look at all of those impacts. On the plus side, we've got lower emissions, so look for the good things. I'll take whatever it is that I can.
So you're opposed to them decreasing JobKeepers. We know it's coming. It feels a bit mean that they're doing it to those here in Victoria.
Yeah, so the report that we've just written is about the coronavirus supplement. That's the Job Seeker. So that's the one that raised, from $40 a day effectively to $80 a day. So people, I know from our colleagues friends at ACOS that there are people who are finally able to put three meals on the table, to buy fresh fruit and vegetables, to buy a new pair of shoes, things that a lot of us might take for granted, but for people struggling on $280 a week particularly in our big cities, is just not great. But even if you took aside the fact that people can't live on that, we've got too many people below the poverty line, that people on JobSeeker/New Start have had their standard of living compared to everyone else in Australia, including pensioners, decline by some 40% over the last 25 years, because it's been going up by the CPI, and their cost of living is higher than the standard CPI. Everyone else is getting average weekly earnings increases, so they've got that. But even if you took away all of that fairness issue, on top of that, this has been absolutely fundamental to stemming the bloodshed across the economy. We have seen all of these low-income families spend that money because they basically have to for essentials. So it has been so good to help our economy. And yes, we still contracted, but -7% in the June quarter. You should see some of the numbers coming out of Europe, -20, -30 in some countries. So it has been critical. And to take away that safety net now, when unemployment is still rising, I hope that when we get to the budget next month, the Prime Minister will announce a permanent increase to the rate. We haven't said or modelled what that should be, but it certainly is higher than the current, $5.50 or so a fortnight, which the maximum rate, which is just not adequate.
Oh, look, ask a politician to live on that for a fortnight. Now, so get the Prime Minister to live on that for a fortnight. I feel a campaign coming on. I feel a T-shirt being printed.
Well, the challenge has been thrown down to many politicians by ACOS and others, and they've just gone, of course I could, oh no, what, and then, then they just hope the media turns away. But not one of them's been prepared to take the challenge up.
So they are going to they are going to pull that back. They're also going to pull back JobKeepers. Now, I heard you in an interview talking about these zombie companies that weren't going to make it anyway, which is fair play. But you also said, which I thought was really kind, you said, they weren't going to make it, but what they've actually done is they've kept their people employed while they've tried to, is it pivot, which is the new slang? Is it fair to lower JobKeepers here in Victoria when we're just coming out of lockdown?
I personally think the timing is wrong because it's, look, I've got no problem with having a lower rate for those who are on part-time. I think that should have been done earlier, to be honest, because people who were earning a couple of $100s a week suddenly getting, $1,500 a fortnight was crazy. So I think that's right, but lowering the full-time rate from $1,500 to $1,200 will be very hard for a lot of people. We will see, we know this money is being spent, so we will see the impact in the economy. It will be a drag on economic activity. And that's what I'm modelling for the job seeker supplements. It's the same thing for JobKeeper. The more you cut that back, the less spending in the economy, the more you affect other jobs, and you actually get into this vicious cycle rather than a virtuous cycle. So the timing of when we remove these supports, and eventually JobKeeper will need to go, and it will be great when we can take it off. But we just need to be very careful about when we do the timing. I do worry that there are too many businesses now that, given how long this has gone on for, originally this was designed for a 3, maybe a 6 months at worst problem. Obviously, this is much, much longer. And JobKeeper might not be the thing that's right for all businesses. There are some that we are going to have to unfortunately let fail. There are people's jobs that are going to go. There is nothing we can do about that. What we then need to be doing is to invest on the other side and keep the fiscal stimulus going in ways that, so invest in community housing, invest in green infrastructure, invest in skills, all of those things that will create jobs now and also increase future productivity. And the government has announced a few things, so we just need to see a bit more of that happening.
They've just announced the shovel ready, and look, we've been waiting for shovel ready since May, so they've just kind of re-announced it. Thank you guys, it's really sweet, 7.7 billion. But I was speaking to Sally McManus, the ACTU secretary, and she said to me, it's really great that they're doing a lot of this construction. She said construction's, and you'll know this better than I do, Nicki, construction's, you know, is it 10% of the economy is construction, or 10% of the workforce is construction? But she said it'd be really great for them to concentrate too. She said that's quite, that's a masculine, there's some masculinity around that. She said we need to start looking at, you know, a lot of the service industries that have lost their jobs have been women, or there are a lot of women out of work. What can the government do, or have the government given any consideration to actually looking at female-centric stimulus that's actually going to elevate women to offer them opportunities? Because apparently after 45 we're pretty done in the workforce anyway.
Yeah.
Well, I love how you did that, Nicki. Yeah. Yeah. Damn it.
Still going. Look, I think everybody's going to be working longer because they have to, because they're extending, you know, how long it is until you can access your superannuation. So we need to think about longer careers for people, at least until we reach the tipping point with AI, where, you know, then we're in a whole new different paradigm. But for the moment, so Grattan Institute has certainly looked at this. I know Equity Economics has certainly looked at this. Quite a few people have looked at how do we think about, you know, what are the sorts of jobs that we do. The gender divide, the gender inequity is a really big issue, and we know that women have been much more adversely affected right across a whole load of pillars in this pandemic, and will continue to be so by things like, you know, the raising of arts degree fees, for example. So we need to address this. Nobody, well, that's not true. So some independent think tanks have come up with some suggestions, particularly around the education workforce, for example. We can invest more in our health workforce. But what we also need to do is to address, you know, part of the issue with getting better parity in economic terms between the sexes is that, you know, women, for whatever reasons, tend to self-select into lower paying jobs. And we need to kind of inculcate in girls, you know, right from the early age, you can do anything that a boy can do. You are just as good at maths. If you want to be an engineer, be an engineer. If we have flexible workplaces that allow, you know, I mean, women obviously biologically we bear the kids, but there's no reason why we can't do more sharing of child rearing. And I'm seeing that with, you know, my younger team. There is much more of that shared parenting, which I just love.
Yeah.
You know, it's and you know, I'm obviously talking about heteronormative couples, where, you know, it's around the men who go off. But, you know, across all couples, we want to see sharing. Where if both parties want to work, then they should be able to. We shouldn't have this divide where, all right, one person's earning so much more than the other. You know, I guess that's an issue. But why is it always the men who are earning so much more than the women in those relationships? Why are we, even when we do just as many working hours, why are we doing double the unpaid work that men do? There are all these cultural norms, and so it's not just about sort of stimulus for now is good, and we need to address gender equity, but gender equity in terms of the stimulus, we need to go way beyond that and look at these issues around skills and career choice and support in the workplace. It's a really big picture. You know, childcare and access to affordable childcare.
Childcare. I think childcare is number one. Do you know, in New Zealand, I think my sister paid $20 a week for childcare. You know, in Europe, there are some countries where you go to work and the childcare is a part of work. So women are not disadvantaged by being participants in the workforce. And you know what? There are women out there that really want to work. They're not working just to make a dollar. They really love their jobs. We have to find a way as a nation that we can actually provide that to them. And I think that would be the first place to start, is just to provide free childcare, or childcare that is affordable. You know, most women that work now are earning just to keep their children in childcare, and that's just counterintuitive. I want to ask you, there's not much said about it, but you know, when we have two of our journalists having to go to the Australian embassy to get trucked out of China, that would strongly suggest to me that there's a massive problem with our relationship with China. What does that do to us? How does that affect us? And why are we not talking about it?
Well, I mean, I think there's a little bit of conversation, but I think there's also a sense that, you know, the Chinese hold us, by the purse strings, I guess is a polite way of putting it, in terms of, you know, we are so reliant on them for our exports are 20% of our economy, and a third of our exports are going to China. So, you know, they are a really important part of our economy. And to die in a ditch over the COVID, inquiry as to its origins, I totally understand, and I totally believe that it is the right thing to do. But for us to die in a ditch on that issue, and to force that when the economic consequences of doing so are so difficult, I don't know that that's the best outcome for Australians as a whole. I think we absolutely need to do something to thaw the relationship. Now, the head of the Department of Foreign Affairs, is a former Beijing diplomat and ambassador. She understands the country extremely well, and I'm sure that DFAT is working behind the scenes to try and, you know, see how the relationship can be repaired. But it's, you know, we've seen beef, we've seen barley, we've seen wine. They're now talking about targeting our wheat. This is devastating for Australia, you know, and if it were to extend to iron ore, I don't think it will, and coal, because they need our high quality minerals. But if it were to, you know, extend to those areas, we have to find a way around this. And there's no silver bullet. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that this is an easy fix, because we also have to stand up for what we believe in as being right. And us diversifying where we export to, you know, more to do with India. India has its own issues as well with corruption, but, you know, there's a whole load of castes and all sorts of things.
Oh, look, I could talk about India for 3 days. Yeah, I spent 3 months in India. I'm very clear on India.
It's not the perfect solution that some people say it is, but there are other markets around the world, but that can't change overnight. So we need to manage this relationship and work out a way that we manage it so that we can stay friends, we can still speak our mind when we need to. But, you know, President Xi is a very different character these days than even he was 10 years ago. And he has a very authoritarian regime. He has given himself absolute and eternal power, so that he is now leader until he dies. And he is brooking just no resistance from anyone. And they are, you know, marching their way across the world. And perhaps no one should be surprised that as their economic power has risen, so would their global political power. And we're now facing the consequences of that. So it is a difficult issue. It's a critical one for Australia. We need to resolve it. But unfortunately, the solutions, I was briefly a diplomat and in my very early days, and I can't see that there are any particular easy solutions that that wouldn't already been pursued by our diplomats behind the scenes.
I understand they're upset about us looking into COVID and its origins. But you know what? There has to be some mutual cultivation of kindness so we can get through this. Because you said it to me on the last show. You said, you know, the stuff we sell them, they like. So it's not in their benefit not to want to work with us. But yeah, it's such a delicate pot, isn't it? Mate, thank you for joining me. Thank you for hanging out. I love it. Yeah. We will do it again soon. I'm really interested to see what happens to Victoria after we get out of this. Nice seeing you. I mean it, and thank you for your time. You're just a genuine hero of mine. Everyone that's sitting at home, we want you to know that we're thinking about you. We want to thank our joint team that make our shows possible to bring us to air. We want to thank our participants and our guests for joining us. Take care, everyone. Be well. If you have any questions for any of our guests, please reach out to us at GotMoney.